Welcome to the deep dive. You're here because you want to get smart, fast, on things that matter without, getting lost in all the noise.
Exactly.
Today, we're tackling something pretty significant, a complex issue I know many of you are grappling with as you think about your nation's futures.
hmm
We're diving into the relationship between the Christian gospel and, well, the tough process of nation building.
Especially in regions your sources label as emergent nations, places like Africa, Asia, Eurasia, Latin America.
Right, and it's a really critical discussion, isn't it? Especially when you look at the concerns coming through in your materials.
Absolutely. There's this palpable sense of worry among Christians in these areas about how things are going.
Yeah, like deep concerns about corruption, divisions, ethnic, religious, and just, the struggle for good governance. These themes pop up again and again.
They really do. And your sources give some pretty concrete examples that hit home.
Like Malaysia, right, that 2013 election. The
Yeah.
opposition wins the popular vote but doesn't get the majority in parliament.
Yeah, that kind of situation naturally makes people question, the credibility, the moral authority of the government. It's understandable.
Totally. And it's not just one place. Your sources mention Christian university students in Uganda feeling frustrated, wanting to leave because corruption and inefficiency are just so rampant.
That really says a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah.
About the day-to-day impact of these bigger issues. It's disillusioning for people.
And then there's that World Bank statistic about Malaysia. Again, over 1 million people leaving, and a third of them highly skilled.
Wow. That makes you pause and think about the long-term impact, the brain drain, the future development.
It really does. So all these examples, they show this deep yearning for change, right? A feeling that something fundamental needs to shift.
Which brings us right to the core question for today's deep dive, drawing directly from those concerns in your sources. Does the Christian gospel actually have, real practical relevance for these huge socio-political economic challenges that emergent nations are facing?
That is the big question, because it can feel, well, overwhelming. You look at these massive problems and wonder, can faith really make a difference at a national level?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're digging into. We're going to explore this multi-layered Christian approach to nation building that your sources lay out.
Yeah, looking at it from different angles.
Exactly. We'll touch on evangelism, social uplift, moral reformation, reconciliation, even developing a Christian political vision. It's about understanding how faith might intersect with building a stronger society.
And what's interesting is how your sources frame it, starting with the individual, the personal transformation, and how that can ripple outwards.
So the first layer they talk about is evangelism and this idea of a changed mindset.
Right. And your sources bring up a really arresting viewpoint here. Matthew Paris, he describes himself as an atheist, wrote this article, "As an atheist, I truly believe Africa needs God."
That definitely makes you stop and think. An atheist saying that.
It really does. He was reflecting on his time in Malawi, and he argued pretty strongly, actually, that Christian evangelism brought about this unique spiritual change that purely secular efforts just couldn't seem to match.
What did he see specifically?
He felt Christianity kind of unlocked a sense of individual potential, fostered more initiative, maybe even a willingness to question things,
Yeah.
which he saw as vital for progress.
So even someone outside the faith recognized this transformative power, something beyond just, aid programs.
Exactly. The insight, even from a non-believer, is that there's something in Christian evangelism that empowers individuals, gives them agency, and that's foundational for any society moving forward.
So it's deeper than just attending church. It's a shift in how people see themselves, their capabilities, which then has wider effects.
Precisely. Your sources argue that faith in Christ changes worldviews, values, empowering people to tackle challenges in their own lives and communities.
Okay.
And this leads pretty naturally into the next idea, which is social lift, basically tackling poverty, improving living standards.
Right. And here your sources pull in some really powerful historical examples, like the Methodist revival back in 18th century England. Apparently, those early Methodist groups didn't just offer spiritual support. They provided structure, hope, practical skills, things that genuinely helped people climb out of poverty.
It was holistic.
Wasn't it?
Spiritual and very practical, hand in hand.
Yeah. And your sources say this isn't just ancient history. They see similar patterns with, say, the rise of Pentecostalism among the poor in Latin America.
Socioeconomic improvements following spiritual revival.
And then there's India with the Dalit communities. The argument is that conversion to Christianity often opened doors for social advancement, challenging centuries of caste-based discrimination.
It's a controversial area sometimes, but the link is often observed.
There's also that amazing story from East Malaysia, the Linbawang tribe.
Oh yeah, that one's striking.
Reportedly, a community really struggling widespread alcohol issues.
Yeah.
Then they embrace Christianity.
And the transformation, according to your sources, was total. They became a key part of the largest Protestant church there, many achieving professional success. It's a dramatic example of community-level change driven by faith.
It really is.
It's interesting, too, Peter Berger, the sociologist, looked at Pentecostalism and sort of cautiously endorsed the prosperity gospel in certain contexts.
Cautiously. How so?
Well, he argued it could instill something like a Protestant work ethic, a belief that poverty isn't just fate,
Yeah.
that change is possible.
Oh, okay. But the source does make a careful distinction, right, between maybe a gospel of need in poorer areas versus a potential gospel of greed elsewhere.
Absolutely crucial distinction. The context matters hugely, but the core idea remains. Faith-based movements can be powerful engines for social and economic progress.
Which then brings us to the next layer, moral reformation, tackling corruption head on.
Yes, because we started by talking about how widespread corruption is.
Yeah.
Like in Uganda and Malaysia. How does a Christian approach address that?
Your sources really stress that laws alone aren't enough, are they? If the underlying culture doesn't value integrity.
Exactly. You need more than just rules. You need a shift in values.
Yeah.
And there's that fascinating example from China.
The cultural Christians.
Yeah, intellectuals, some not even religious believers themselves, suggesting Christianity might offer a necessary moral foundation for China's development.
It's pretty remarkable, them linking Christian values directly to building a stable, ethical market economy. One even contrasted America's early Puritan ethic with China's focus just on economics, without that moral underpinning.
But, and this is important, your sources are clear. Just having Christian values around doesn't automatically fix things.
Right. It takes effort, like what happened in Britain in the 18th and 19th centuries.
Influenced by the Wesleyan revival, the Clapham sect, Britain went through this huge transformation.
From being described as incredibly corrupt.
Yeah, like as corrupt as any developing nation today.
To being known for integrity, for Victorian values, even if that term is complex.
Right. And John Wesley's focus on personal holiness, moral conduct, spread through those small group meetings. That seems to have had a massive effect, especially among working people.
And then the Clapham sect, Wilberforce, and others targeting the upper classes, pushing not just abolition, but also reforming social behaviors.
It was a conscious effort, top down and bottom up, to change the culture.
So the takeaway seems to be, fighting corruption needs that individual change of heart, yes, but also actively cultivating Christian values in communities and deliberately trying to shape public opinion towards ethics.
Exactly. It's a multi-level effort.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the third key element, reconciliation, especially in response to ethnic conflict.
Which is just such a painful, deep-rooted issue in so many emergent nations.
Terribly difficult. And here, the example of post-apartheid South Africa is just incredibly powerful.
It really is. After decades of that brutal system, the potential for violence, for civil war, was enormous.
Absolutely immense. But what happened there, it offers such profound lessons.
You had Nelson Mandela's leadership. He was Christian, wasn't he?
Yes. And then the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, their focus on forgiveness, restorative justice, not just punishment.
It somehow averted what seemed like an almost inevitable bloodbath.
Many would say it was miraculous. That focus on truth-telling and forgiveness, however imperfect, was crucial.
That image of Mandela having his former jailer at his inauguration, it's just stunning. Embodies that radical reconciliation.
It does.
Yeah.
And your sources mention something less known too, the critical role Christian leaders played behind the scenes during the negotiations for the first democratic elections.
Oh, really?
Yeah, apparently things had totally broken down. There was intense prayer, specific efforts towards reconciliation, and then a breakthrough happened. Your sources describe it as averting disaster almost supernaturally.
Wow. It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that what seems politically impossible might be overcome through faith and this deep commitment to actually reconciling.
It shows the potential, even in the darkest situations.
Okay, so that leads us to the final piece your sources highlight. The need for a well-thought-out Christian political vision.
Right, and this is where your sources see a potential weakness, perhaps.
How so?
While evangelical Christians in many emergent nations are getting more involved politically, which is significant,
Yeah.
they sometimes lack maybe a deep grounding in the history and theology behind concepts like freedom, justice, human rights.
Ah, I see. So they might be fighting for good things, but maybe without fully grasping the roots of those ideas within Christian thought itself.
Exactly. Your sources emphasize how much of the best in Western democratic traditions actually grew out of, 2 millennia of Christian thinking and history.
Can you give an example?
Well, think about the idea of one person, one vote. Fundamentally, it stems from the Christian belief in inherent human dignity. Everyone's made in God's image. Everyone has intrinsic worth.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or even checks and balances in government. That connects back to the Christian understanding of original sin, the idea that power corrupts, and no single person or group should have absolute control.
And the Reformation comes up too, right? As being key for democracy's development?
Yes, hugely influential.
Yeah.
That emphasis on individual conscience, individual responsibility before God, eventually that had a massive political ripple effects.
Your sources mention scholars like Harold Berman too.
Right, arguing that key Western legal principles, civil disobedience, human rights, limits on rulers, are largely products of Christian history. Rodney Stark even suggests Christianity's embrace of reason paved the way for freedom and capitalism.
It's a strong claim that the very foundations of modern democracy have these deep, often unacknowledged Christian roots.
And the point your sources make is, it's vital for Christians in emergent nations today to understand this heritage.
Why is that so important?
Because without that deeper understanding, political action might lack a solid philosophical base, a long-term vision rooted in these core principles.
So the sources are advocating for making this history more known.
Yes, making these resources accessible, fostering dialogue, helping Christians, and maybe even non-Christians, think through how these foundational ideas apply practically in their own unique contexts.
Because applying them isn't always straightforward, is it? Implementing universal suffrage in a hierarchical society? Or ensuring genuine religious freedom where one group dominates?
Exactly. Those are real-world challenges that need careful contextual thinking, but grounded in those core principles.
So wrapping this all together, this deep dive into your sources, shows this really interconnected approach, doesn't it?
Yeah, a multifaceted Christian strategy for nation building,
It starts with the gospel transforming individuals,
leading to social and economic uplift,
fostering moral change to fight corruption,
prioritizing reconciliation to heal deep divisions.
and finally building a strong, theologically grounded Christian political vision.
It all connects.
So, as you think about this history, this impact of Christian principles in different places, what do you see as the most crucial steps now? For Christians in today's emergent nations, trying to build societies that are truly just and flourishing, it's a big question to ponder, isn't it?
It is, but it shifts the focus, I think, from that initial sense of helplessness or despair we talked about.
Yeah.
By maybe embracing this kind of comprehensive gospel-centered view, your sources suggest there's real hope, real potential for positive change in building better nations.